The first sound that morning wasn't the rooster, it was metal, a sharp snap, like lightning chewing through steel. I glanced at the clock, 5:47 a.m. bolt cutters. My padlock. The air outside carried that thin, frozen smell you only get right before sunrise, in the Rockies. I could see my breath fog the window as three shadows crept toward the barn, flashlights trembling, boots crunching on frost. The same three self-appointed compliance officers from the HOA, led by their queen bee Delilah, though everyone in Millbrook Estates called her Karen with a clipboard. 8 months earlier, she'd just been a noisy neighbor complaining about my unsightly red barn. Now she was sending patrols at dawn with bolt cutters and fake inspection badges. But this time, she'd finally out-Karened herself, because sitting inside that century-old barn, sipping black coffee from a dented thermos, was Sheriff Hendricks, and beside him, a federal warrant with her name on it. The second clang of the cutters echoed like a starter pistol. I watched from my porch as the barn door creaked open and sunlight caught the sheriff's badge, one flash of gold that froze them mid-stride. You could almost hear the panic snap through their bones, and before I tell you how a small-town electrician ended up outsmarting an HOA empire and turning their fake rules into real felonies, hit that subscribe button. Because if you like stories where the little guy wins by knowing the law better than the bullies, you're going to want to hear how this one ends, with justice, headlines, and a barn that still stands. My name's Ezra Blackwood, and that barn has been in my family for 100 years. Granddad built it in 1923 with timber hauled by horse from the next valley. The paint's peeled, the roof sags, and the wood smells like every season we ever survived. Hay, rain, dust, and hard work. After my divorce, I moved back to the homestead. 15 acres tucked between prairie and mountain light. Each morning, I'd sit on the porch, coffee steaming, watch the sunrise pour over the old orchard. The quiet used to feel like medicine. Then the developers came. They called it Millbrook Estates. Rows of beige boxes slapped over what used to be grazing land. Within months, the prairie was gone, replaced by vinyl fences and community standard signs. Property values shot up, tempers shortened, and it didn't take long before the newcomers formed an HOA. At first, their letters sounded friendly. Invitation to join, shared vision, all that sugar-coated nonsense. I didn't respond. This property sits outside their plat, older than their charter. But ignoring a control freak is like waving a red flag in front of a bull wearing heels. She came herself one October morning. Delilah Waywright, president of the HOA, real estate agent by trade, menace by hobby. She parked her luxury SUV right beside my gravel drive, heels clicking across the stones like nails on glass. "Mr. Blackwood," she began, smiling wide enough to smell the perfume. "We need to talk about bringing your property into compliance." I told her politely that my land wasn't part of her subdivision, and I'd comply with county code, not her committee. Her smile didn't twitch, but her eyes sharpened like scissors. 3 days later, a violation notice appeared zip-tied to my mailbox. Structure violates Millbrook Estates Covenant 4.2.1b, non-conforming agricultural buildings prohibited within residential overlay. Fine, $150 per day. I laughed, tossed it in the burn barrel, and figured that was the end of it. It wasn't. Every morning, a new notice. Fines stacked like poker chips, $75 for gravel driveway, $50 for visible pickup truck. She even called my woodworking shop a commercial hazard. Within a month, her math claimed I owed over $4,000 to an HOA I didn't even belong to. The mailbox turned into a daily insult. I'd rip the zip tie, read the nonsense, burn it. But burning paper doesn't stop rumors. Delilah weaponized social media next. She posted pictures of my barn, cropped tight to make it look like a junkyard. Comments rolled in, "Eyesore, brings down property values." Some neighbors I'd never met crossed the street rather than wave. At night I could see the glow of phones through their windows. The digital mob working overtime. But here's the thing about living on the same dirt your granddad worked. You learn patience. I started saving every letter, screenshotting every post. I installed cameras, trail cams hidden in apple trees, motion sensors by the gate, because something told me this was only warming up. Then came the certified envelope, official letterhead, serious tone. According to County Fire Inspection Division, my barn posed an immediate hazard and required entry within 48 hours, except the real county office had never heard of such a complaint. That was the moment I realized Delilah wasn't just bossy. She was forging government documents. I could have lost my temper, but instead, I poured another cup of coffee and started planning. When I walked into the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office carrying a folder thick with fake letters, the deputy on duty raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Blackwood, you've been busy," he said after flipping through the evidence. "Not as busy as the people trying to steal my land." I told him that's when I met Sheriff Hendricks, a man built like a cedar post and twice as steady. He listened without interrupting, eyes narrowing at the forged seal on one notice. "This is mail fraud," he finally said. "Keep documenting. We'll be ready when she crosses the line." Cross it she did. Within weeks, the violation fairy, as I started calling her, escalated to new lows. Anonymous calls to zoning, claims that I ran an unlicensed business, even a fake complaint to the IRS. Meanwhile, I was digging through county records of my own, somewhere between coffee refills and courthouse photocopies. I stumbled on something my grandfather had written into the original deed back in 1923. All subsurface mineral rights retained in perpetuity by the Blackwood family, mineral rights. Underneath every beige house in Millbrook Estates, I remember whispering to the empty records room, "Well, Grandpa, looks like you just handed me a stick of dynamite." I hired a property rights lawyer, Sarah Martinez, who nearly spilled her latte when she saw the paperwork. "Ezra," she said, tapping the claws, "they're sitting on your gold mine. If they push you again, we'll push back with the law." So I did what Delilah never expected. I went public legally. I posted the mineral rights clause on the community page with a polite caption. "Appreciate everyone's concern about my old barn. Fun fact, turns out my family owns what's beneath your homes. We should probably talk about royalties before any more violations show up." The thread exploded. Half the neighbors were furious at Delilah. The other half pretended they'd never supported her. That's when her campaign of paper harassment turned into physical trespassing. Nighttime footsteps near my fence. Flashlights sweeping the orchard. Someone rattling my barn lock at 2 a.m. I started sleeping light and keeping the sheriff on speed dial. Then, one September morning, the deputy called. "We think she's planning a fake inspection," he said. "Mind if we set a trap?" I smiled. "Sheriff, I've got plenty of coffee and an empty barn." Which brings us back to that cold morning, 3 figures creeping across my property with bolt cutters, thinking they'd finally found a way to force entry for public safety. They didn't know every step was caught on camera, or that Sheriff Hendricks was sitting inside, coffee steaming, federal warrant in hand. When that barn door swung open and sunlight hit his badge, their faces went white as the frost under their feet. 8 months of harassment ended in one perfect second of silence, and as the sheriff stood up and said, "Morning, folks. You're under arrest for trespassing and fraud," I realized something simple but powerful. You don't have to shout to fight back. You just have to document, stay calm, and know the law better than the bullies. After the arrests that morning, the silence on my property felt unreal. For the first time in months, no phone buzz, no threats, no headlights crawling past my fence. Just the sound of a deputy's radio crackling as they drove the trespassers away. Sheriff Hendricks stayed long enough to finish his coffee and promised that the county attorney would contact me. "You did everything right, Ezra," he said. "You kept calm, documented, and called the law. Now let's make sure this sticks." I nodded, watching the patrol lights fade down the dirt road. The frost was melting fast, glittering off the barn roof like the universe had finally exhaled. But deep down I knew the fight wasn't over. People like Delilah didn't go quietly. They regrouped. By lunchtime the phone rang. Sarah Martinez, my lawyer. "I just got the preliminary report," she said. "They'll face trespassing and mail fraud charges, but Ezra, this goes deeper. Those documents you sent me last month, the forged fire inspection letters, were printed on a business computer registered to Vista Commercial Properties. Vista? I asked, stomach tightening. Delilah's brother's company. They've been buying agricultural parcels all over the county. Looks like your land was next. I leaned back in my chair, letting the truth sink in. She hadn't been trying to enforce community standards. She'd been softening me up for a land grab. Sarah's voice sharpened. We're filing a civil harassment suit immediately, but I want you to do one thing for me. Keep every scrap of communication, every photo. I think we're looking at organized fraud. I promised I would. After we hung up, I stepped out onto the porch and looked toward Millbrook Estates. From a distance, the houses looked peaceful. Kids' bikes on driveways, sprinklers clicking, an illusion of order. Underneath, it was a powder keg. That afternoon, I printed every deed, every legal notice, and pinned them to my workshop wall like a detective board. Lines of red string connected names, dates, signatures. Each thread led back to one motive: profit. 2 nights later, I saw headlights stop near my gate. I kept the porch light off and watched through the window. A figure got out. Margaret Chen, one of the few neighbors who'd stopped by with pie back when this started. She was holding a folder. Mr. Blackwood, she whispered when I opened the door. You should see this. Inside the folder were minutes from the last HOA board meeting. Someone had leaked them. The notes mentioned expedited acquisition strategy and removal of agricultural non-compliance barrier. They were talking about my property like it was an obstacle to bulldoze. Margaret's voice shook. I'm done with her, Ezra. People are scared to speak up, but I'm not. If you need witnesses, count me in. That moment marked the shift. I wasn't fighting alone anymore. The next week, Sarah organized a meeting at her office with a county commissioner and a representative from the state's Property Rights Bureau. They'd heard about the arrests and were quietly furious. If an HOA president forged county documents, the commissioner said, we want her name in every paper in Colorado. Sarah smiled. We'll make sure of it. The legal process moved fast once the evidence started stacking. The FBI requested my recordings, the audio of Delilah's fake inspection plans, the metadata from the forged letters. Every time they compared digital fingerprints, another lie unraveled. Meanwhile, I focused on rebuilding my reputation. I posted a calm, factual update on the neighborhood page for anyone wondering about this morning's incident. Law enforcement confirmed the individuals who entered my property were acting without any official authority. Please be cautious about any documents claiming to come from county offices. Verification numbers are listed on the county website. No anger, no accusations, just facts. Within an hour, comments started turning. We had no idea, Ezra. Delilah's gone too far. That night, my phone buzzed non-stop. Neighbors wanted advice, how to check deeds, how to verify letters. It hit me then. Knowledge was the one thing Delilah couldn't weaponize. Still, the stress wore on me. Every sound outside made me reach for the window. Every envelope made my heart jump. But each small win reminded me this was bigger than my barn. It was about showing people they could fight back without breaking the law. One morning, Sarah called with news that nearly made me spill my coffee. Ezra, you're going to like this. We traced a transfer of funds, Delilah's HOA account. Made payments to Vista Commercial for consulting. Turns out the HOA was funneling community dues into her brother's development. Project, is that even legal? I asked. She laughed softly. Not when you hide it. That's embezzlement. By midsummer, the county prosecutor and the FBI had opened parallel cases, criminal fraud and civil conspiracy. Delilah's lawyer tried calling me to discuss settlement, but Sarah handled that with one sentence. My client doesn't negotiate with forgers. Word spread fast. The Denver Post called for an interview. I declined. I wasn't after fame. What I wanted was quiet, but quiet was a luxury I hadn't earned yet. One evening in July, just as the sun dipped behind the ridge, my security camera pinged. Movement by the orchard. I'd zoomed in on the feed, 2 figures, one holding something metallic. I called the sheriff, and within minutes, a patrol unit rolled up. They caught a young man trying to cut through the fence. He claimed Delilah had paid him to inspect drainage compliance. Turned out he worked part-time for her brother's company. Another link in the chain. Sheriff Hendricks just shook his head. She never learns. After that, things accelerated. Sarah scheduled a community meeting at the town hall, open to the public. I almost didn't go, figured folks were tired of hearing my name, but she said, "Ezra, transparency kills rumors. Let them see you're reasonable." When I walked in, the room was packed. Homeowners filled every seat. Even a local news crew had set up a tripod. Delilah wasn't there. Rumor was she'd left town for a conference. Sarah took the podium first, calm and confident. She laid out the timeline, forged notices, fake inspections, embezzled HOA funds. When she projected the documents onto a screen, an audible gasp rippled through the crowd. Then she nodded to me. "Mr. Blackwood, would you like to say a few words?" I stepped up, heart pounding. "I know we've all been through a lot. I never wanted a feud. I just wanted to live peacefully on my land and follow the real law, not someone's power trip. If this mess taught me anything, it's that honesty and patience still matter. And if anyone here's worried about what comes next, don't be. The sheriff and the courts have it handled. All we have to do is tell the truth." Applause filled the hall. After the meeting, a man from 3 streets over shook my hand. "Ezra, you turned the tables on a whole system. Feels good knowing somebody's got backbone around here." I smiled, tired but lighter than I'd felt in months. The next day, Sarah called again. "Federal investigators are finalizing the mineral rights valuation. You might want to sit down." When she told me the estimate, millions over 10 years, I almost dropped the phone. "You mean to tell me the same land she tried to fine me for could fund scholarships?" "Exactly," she said. "And that's the kind of ending juries love." We spent the next weeks organizing every document for court. Margaret Chen and several neighbors agreed to testify. The case snowballed beyond Jefferson County. Property rights groups across Colorado started sharing the story. Delilah finally resurfaced through her lawyer, claiming she'd been misled by her brother. But by then, the evidence was too thick. Emails, bank transfers, and those early HOA meeting notes formed an airtight narrative. As Sarah put it, she built her empire on paperwork. Now paperwork's going to bury it. I spent evenings in the barn restoring old cabinets, trying to keep my hands busy while the legal gears turned. The smell of sawdust and linseed oil helped me think. Sometimes I'd glance at the wall of documents, burnt edges of violation notices framed like trophies, and remind myself that patience and proof had done what anger never could. By late August, Sarah warned me something might happen soon. "They're cornered. People like this sometimes lash out. Keep your cameras running." She was right. The next weekend, someone slashed my mailbox and spray-painted "Move Out" on the fence. Sheriff Hendricks came personally to photograph it. "That's intimidation, Ezra. Don't worry, we'll add it to the file." A few days later, he called with the kind of voice you don't forget. "We've got confirmation they're planning another stunt. Looks like they want to plant evidence for a health inspection. You up for round 2? I laughed softly. "Sheriff, I've got plenty of coffee left." That night I sat on the porch, the air still warm but carrying that hint of fall. I watched the stars come out over the barn, the same barn my grandfather built. I'd thought about how close I'd come to giving up months earlier, how many people had believed the lies. Now the law was on my side, the truth documented, the community finally awake. All that was left was patience, and maybe a few more cups of black coffee. I could sense it in my bones. They were about to make their last mistake. It took weeks for the investigation to move from paperwork to action, but Sheriff Hendricks and Sarah both warned me to stay steady. "People like this always try one last play," the sheriff said. "Let them. We'll be waiting." He was right. It started with rumors. Neighbors saying they'd seen Delilah's brother Marcus back in town. Then an anonymous envelope arrived on my porch, stamped County Health Department. Inside was another inspection notice, full of threats about hazardous materials and groundwater contamination. I didn't even have to look twice to know the seal was fake. Sarah called it immediately. "They're trying to manufacture probable cause. If we let them, they'll plant something and claim it's yours." So what do we do? We turn it into a movie, she said. You, the sheriff, the FBI, cameras rolling. They'll walk right into their own arrest. The next 5 days felt like rehearsing for a play no one wanted to perform. Deputies installed motion sensors in the orchard. FBI techs hid miniature lenses behind tool shelves inside the barn. Margaret Chen baked cookies for the officers staking out across the road. She said it was for morale. I just kept the coffee pot full. The night before the inspection, the farm felt unnaturally quiet. Even the coyotes stayed off the ridge. I stood in the doorway of the barn, running my hand over the old cedar beam that my grandfather had notched with his pocket knife in 1923. You built it solid, old man, I whispered. Let's see if it can hold one more storm. At dawn, the frost came back, thin white fingers across the pasture. Through the kitchen window, I saw them. 3 figures in matching jackets, badges swinging from lanyards that gleamed like plastic toys. Delilah, Marcus, and a nervous kid I'd never seen before. They carried clipboards and a duffel bag heavy enough to hold their evidence. I stayed in the house while the sheriff waited inside the barn, calm as a mountain. His radio crackled softly. Units in position. The FBI agents were tucked behind the tree line, cameras ready. At exactly 5:47 a.m., the cutters bit through my new padlock. The door creaked open. They stepped inside. Good morning, folks, Hendricks said, standing from a hay bale, badge catching the first light. Steam curled from his thermos. I don't suppose you've got a real warrant for that? Delilah froze. Marcus tried to speak, but the words died in his throat. The young man dropped the duffel. Chemical containers clattered onto the floor, rolling toward the sheriff's boots. Within seconds, the side doors burst open. 2 FBI agents moved in, voices firm and practiced. Marcus Wainwright. Delilah Wainwright, you're under arrest for criminal trespass, conspiracy, and forgery of federal documents. I stood outside the barn, the morning air cold in my lungs, and watched them being led to the waiting cars. 8 months of harassment ended not with shouting, but with handcuffs clicking like punctuation marks at the end of a very long sentence. News trucks were there within the hour. Reporters shouted questions, microphones flashing. I kept it simple. I just protected what my family built. The law did the rest. By noon, the story was everywhere. HOA president arrested in land fraud scheme. The same neighbors who'd once avoided me stopped by with casseroles and apologies. Margaret hugged me so hard my ribs popped. Bobby Kowalski, the veteran from down the street, said, "You didn't just save your land, brother. You taught us all how to stand our ground." A week later, the county dissolved the old HOA. A new community board formed. Voluntary, transparent, no dues without consent. The FBI wrapped up its case within months. Federal mail fraud, RICO conspiracy, falsifying inspection documents. Delilah pled guilty and went to prison. Marcus cut a deal and forfeited his company's holdings. The mineral rights claim Sarah filed went through unchallenged. When the lease auction finally happened, I signed the papers knowing my grandfather's stubbornness had just turned into generational security. We used part of the money to start the Blackwood Community Fund, scholarships for local students, a grant for volunteer firefighters, and a small business fund for veterans. Even the old barn got a facelift. New beams, new red paint, and a plaque on the wall that read, "Truth wins quietly." Life settled back into rhythm. Morning smelled like coffee and cedar again. I'd sit on the porch, watch the mist rise off the orchard, and hear laughter from the community garden where the old HOA office once stood. The tension in my chest that had lived there for months finally eased. Sometimes people ask if I regret any of it, if I'd have been happier just paying their fines and moving away. I tell them no, because this wasn't about pride. It was about principle. Every time I see the kids who got those scholarships, I know the fight was worth every sleepless night. The sheriff still stops by now and then, always around sunrise. We drink coffee on the porch and watch the light hit the barn. He jokes, "You ever think about charging admission for folks who want to see where the HOA fell apart?" I laugh. Nah, some things you just let stand as a warning. Last week, a family from another county wrote to thank me. They'd been dealing with a similar HOA nightmare and said my case gave them courage to push back. That's the real payoff. Seeing regular folks realize they don't need power or money to win. Just patience, proof, and the truth on their side. Sometimes, when the morning's quiet, I still hear the echo of those bolt cutters from that first dawn. The sound that used to mean fear, but now reminds me how fast arrogance can snap when it meets the law. The barn still stands, red against the Colorado sky, a reminder that you don't need revenge when justice is patient. If this story taught you something, share it. If it fired you up, hit that like button and subscribe. Because every week I share real stories of ordinary people who beat the odds without breaking the rules. And remember, whenever someone tries to take what's yours, stay calm, stay smart, and let the truth do the talking.